Welcome to episode 1 of Storytime with David Allen Arnold. The reason that I wanted to make a podcast is because I was really sick and tired of listening to bad podcasts. One day I was listening to Gary Vee, who does a podcast, and I love Gary Vee. I follow him on all social media. But I was listening to his podcast, and he proceeded to talk over his guest for about 30 minutes, the entire show. And at the end of the show, he said, "Oh, well, we got to have you back on because I never really got to talk to you very much and hear what you think." And it just made my head explode that I had listened to the entire episode where he had brought this amazing person onto his show and had never allowed them to talk. He just talked over them for the entire podcast. So at that point, I literally said on the spot, that's it, I'm going to make my own podcast. So welcome aboard. This show will be a little bit different. I will have, at some point, some amazing guests because for 25 years, I've been working in the movie and television business. And throughout that time, I've never burned a bridge. So I have maintained a relationship with basically everyone that I've ever worked with. And I have met and worked with some amazing people flying in helicopters for movies like Armageddon and James Bond, and for TV shows like Fear Factor, The Amazing Race, NFL, Monday Night Football, the Super Bowl, the World Series, and The Deadliest Catch. So I will be bringing some of those friends in to tell their stories. I really think that what the world needs more of is stories of people who have survived incredible adventures and people who've had amazing careers. I believe, probably more than anyone, in the next generation. I am 100% behind kids today. And I've heard all the complaints. They're lazy, they're entitled, they don't know how to work, so on and so forth. I've heard all the complaints and I disagree wholeheartedly. I think that kids today and the new generation is exactly like my generation and every other generation. I think that kids today really need to hear stories from people like me who've been working in an amazing career for 25 years. And I think they need to hear not just the success stories, but they really need to hear the disasters, the things that I did wrong, the things that I should have known better and I didn't. I want kids to hear those stories, so that when they look at the world of work, when they look at their life choices, they can decide if they want to take that first job that comes along at Starbucks, or if they want to hold out and maybe spend their time doing something a little bit different. Because that's what I did. So the other reason I'm making a podcast is people have been asking me for over a year to do an audio version of my books. And I'm not ready to do that. I just don't have the ability to properly edit the audio files that I've already begun making for my audiobooks. So in lieu of that, I'm going to read a chapter on this first episode of my podcast so that if you want to hear an audio version of my book, you can turn on YouTube, which I do all the time, and just listen, which is how I take half of my content of the things I watch on YouTube. I just put them on and I just listen to what the people are saying. So the books themselves are a really interesting story. And if you've been following my story, if you know anything about the Help from Above series of books, you know that this all started with an organized crime ring that opened up shop at a school bus stop in my little town. I live in the mountains above Los Angeles. And I didn't know it at the time, but when I crossed paths with these bad guys, I entered into a multi-year struggle against organized crime. And like everything, I learned the hard way. And when all was said and done, even after a lot of crimes that were committed at the school bus stop, I found that I could not bring any form of justice for the kids at the school bus stop. And so one of the only weapons that I had was to begin to write the story of what happened into a book so that everyone will know what the bad guys did for years at this school bus stop. Now, I am a helicopter cameraman. I'm not an author. So writing books was a painful struggle. And I had to do it on my own because, as you'll learn in this series of books, the bad guys were threatening lawsuits, which was scaring away media companies. We actually shot a documentary about the organized crime ring. And that was supposed to be on television years ago. But the bad guys threatened lawsuits to keep this quiet. So I knew that when I did my series of books to expose these guys, that I would have to do it on my own. And it has been a terrible struggle. I really benefited. One of the things you'll learn from my books is that I take advice. And I really benefited from over 1,000 corrections that my friends gave me when they read the book as I was writing it, and now this series of books. One of my friends, Charles Ricciardi, is the producer of our documentary, and he read an early draft of the books, and he gave me almost 1,000 on his own corrections, things that he thought I had said incorrectly or repeated, or my grammar wasn't right, or things I had left out of the story. He gave me over 800 all by himself. And it took me 6 months to go back and correct every single thing that he didn't like, but I did every single one. And I give my friends like Charles credit. I really believe that if my books are readable, that's why. Another thing that Charles told me was, he said, "Dave, this is okay, but I don't like the way that your book begins." And he said, "I think you should start the book with one of your stories." So I went back and I rewrote the first chapter of the book as one of my stories. Here we go. Help from Above by David Allen Arnold. Introduction. Some days you eat the bear. 12,000 pounds of grizzly bears crowd the edge of an Alaskan salmon stream. Melted snow flows down the mountain into the bear's private sushi bar. The icy water shimmers with the vibration of our Bell 206 helicopter. My pilot and I are the only humans for 100 miles, but the bears don't look up at us. They stare at the stream as if they just sat down after a long day and are reading a dinner menu. "What kind of gun do you have?" I asked my pilot. "Oh, I was just thinking about that," he trails off. "I forgot to bring one." Uh-oh, that's not good. The 12 killer beasts just woke up from hibernation and haven't eaten since last summer. Their massive stomachs are empty. Every helicopter in Alaska is armed with heavy caliber guns because if you land, the bears will eat you alive. Many people have been mauled and eaten in the no man's land beneath our skids. But my pilot forgot to bring a gun. So we have nothing to offer the bears except tender human snacks. I take a nervous breath. I've faced death before, but I've never seen so many claws and teeth ready to eat me if the engine quits. My throat tightens. Right now, I need every nut and bolt in this helicopter to keep me away from those hungry bears. You know what's weird? The salmon haven't started running yet, my pilot observes matter-of-factly. What? I gasp. There are no salmon in the salmon stream? If we have to land, we'll be surrounded by bears who haven't eaten since last year. I nervously scan the engine gauges of our old 206 helicopter. The needles calmly point to little green arcs that assure me that all is well with our Allison C-20 gas turbine. And that's when I see it. The smallest needle on the panel fluctuates. Did I really see that? Maybe I'm looking too hard at the gauge. Maybe I've mistaken normal helicopter vibration for a deadly drop in engine RPM. There it is again. The tiny needle quivers. The small needle has a big job on our panel of gauges. The engine is turning at 50,000 RPM, but you can't make a gauge with 50,000 numbers, so the little needle points to an exponential rate, while the big needle points to a healthy speed of 50,000. That tiny needle is our canary in the coal mine. It warns us of danger we can't see or hear. Long before an engine failure shows on the big needle, the little needle indicates a loss of power. And now I'm staring at the little needle just like the bears are staring at the empty salmon stream. To me and the bears, the needle and the stream are life. Please, little gauge, please stay where you are. But the gauge does not stay. It obeys Newton's law, and to my horror, the telltale gauge begins to fall. My heart sinks as the needle drops and makes a complete circle all the way around to zero. Then it starts to spin backwards, circling down in a death spiral. Our canary stops singing and the Jet Ranger engine stalls. Suddenly, the big hand falls off the 50,000 mark. I don't have time for words, just a single panic-stricken syllable. Ooh! My pilot snaps his gauge to the engine gauges. Several of the needles slip out of green and into bright red, warning us of death by gravity and bear claw. There's no time to talk as we rise in our seatbelt straps. For a moment we are weightless as the engine chokes and the red warning lights flash. The noise of our gas turbine is replaced by the ear-splitting engine-out horn. Beep, beep, beep. The horn screams to warn us of what we already know. We're about to hit the ground at 100 miles per hour. Suddenly, the bears look up. My pilot pulls his control levers, but the engine is dead. Instead of pulling us up into the sky, our helicopter falls toward the bears. As we fall out of the sky and tumble to our doom, I'm struck by a solitary thought. Nobody knows I'm here. I've never told anyone what I do for work. My neighbors don't know that I'm flying in a helicopter in Alaska for NBC. No one knows I'm clinging to life above a pack of hungry bears. If I were smart, I would have written a book about my flying career, but I'm not smart. In fact, I've made a series of mistakes that ended up in this gravity-stricken helicopter. I stumbled into this situation without a plan to survive if something went wrong. My neighbors will have to read about my death in the newspaper before they even know I'm in Alaska. I wish I could survive, because someday I want to have children, and those children will need someone to watch over them. I've always felt I was cut out to be a father, but I guess it's not meant to be. I tuck my head into the crash position as our helicopter falls out of the sky. I glance out my window and see a blurred picture of Earth coming up to smash us. My stomach rises uncomfortably in my throat. My own choices brought me to this predicament. I cheated death one too many times. Welcome aboard my unusual journey. I can't promise that you won't be crushed by gravity or eaten by bears, but I can promise you the adventure of a lifetime. Please fasten your seatbelt and brace for impact. My name is David Allen Arnold, and this is my story. So that's the introduction to Help from Above, the first in the series of nonfiction true adventure books. Please, if you haven't already, take a look at the books. They're on Amazon, and they are starting to come available at stores throughout the country. Because this is a grassroots struggle against an organized crime ring, that you'll find out about later in the books, I can use all the help I can get. If there's a bookstore in your town, please tell them about this series of books, Help from Above by David Allen Arnold. I will, as much as I can, I will appear at any bookstore that is willing to sell these books. And in some way or another, I will help any store that is willing to put these books on the shelves and share these true stories, not only of adventure, of life, and of death, and of danger, and especially of the choices we make. And this series of books will continue. I will continue to chronicle the illegal activity at the school bus stop in my town. Also, please take a look at my social media. You can find me on everything from TikTok to Instagram to Facebook to Twitter. And usually you can find me by my name, David Allen Arnold, A-L-A-N. Thank you so much for taking your time to spend with me. I really appreciate it, and I will see you on the next episode.